Welcome back to my little reading nook. Should have shut the front door. Wayne, shut the door. And I figured out in this book, I was like, did I skip even another chapter? Because I did skip a chapter that I went back and re-recorded. And it turned out I started misnumbering. So I'll retitle so that everything has the right numbers, but we are going back, and good thing these are all self-contained. We did miss one. Liberty in Healthcare was really chapter 6, and I put it as 5. Chapter 5 should have been Liberty in the Economy, and that's what we're going to do right now, and I'll retitle them. Maybe I could... Sorry for the confusion. So, Chapter 5, Liberty in the Economy. And I think this one's pretty short. And he says, the most dangerous threat to our safety and security is not the possibility of being invaded by another country, or even the terrorist actions of any of the world's radical elements. Instead, the greatest threat facing the safety of our country is a weak national economy. That is food for thought. When people are not prospering, they get desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. And he asks how this can be fixed. He says, first, by understanding that the government's not the answer to our problems. And in fact, as stated by President Ronald Reagan, in many ways, government really is the problem because it destroys private initiative. And it does that everywhere, not just in the economy, but even in the welfare state. And that's what a lot of people don't recognize. Let me ask you a few of Milton Friedman's questions. Why do you believe that political self-interest works better than economic self-interest? Or why do you believe that government bureaucrats or bureau rats can make more rational choices for you than you can? They certainly think they can. For example, if you feel you get good value for your money by having a particular person cut your hair, why should the government require a license before that chosen person can perform that service for you? Remember, if the work is not worth the money charged, the would-be barber would go out of business regardless of what the government license says. And we can always require that these workers be bonded, which will add further protections. See, why don't you just then require them to be licensed? Like when he talks about switching one requirement for another, I would think if they're open to potential liability and there were willing insurers, a lot of them would be bonded. That's an alternate voluntary way. We shouldn't have to require it. And then he says, of course, we will still need things like protections against environmental pollution. Why not say those should be bonded? And recourse for defective or even harmful products. Yes, recourse. But fortunately, the justice system can handle those issues in most situations. Agreed. There's a quite lengthy passage, and I just wanted to see, yeah, there's not very much left in Liberty in the Economy. So this passage is kind of lengthy, and I apologize, but it's important. So how do property rights fit into this discussion, and why are they so important in producing a thriving economy? Part of the answer is explained by the theory of the tragedy of the commons, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, but he gives a different, I like hearing different examples. It helps me even understand more. Let me give you an example. Consider that there was a grove of apple trees growing wild somewhere along the Oregon Trail during the covered wagon days. So when a wagon train, did I say wagon? When a wagon train would come upon it, the travelers would pick more of the ripe apples than they needed. And why not? They're free. Then the people in the next train would probably pick all of the remaining ripe apples and most of the green ones as well. Why not? They're free, and the travelers can always feed the unripe apples to their oxen. So soon there'd be no more apples at all on the tree. But the people in the next train would cut down the branches and even the trunks of the trees to use as firewood. Why not? They can use the wood, and if they don't cut it down, someone else behind them will. Therefore, in this situation, not only would no one plant, feed, and prune the trees and harvest the apples for maximum benefit, the trees would actually be plundered and soon destroyed. That is the tragedy of the commons. Instead of being husbanded and protected, the apples, the trees, the fish in the ocean, the water in the rivers, the minerals in the earth, all will be plundered. Because if we don't, someone else will. But if a private person had enforceable ownership rights to the apple grove, enforced by a fair and foreseeable system of justice, there would very likely be an abundance of apples for everyone. The owner of the apple trees would price them at a competitive rate, so the people in the first wagon train would only purchase what they really needed. Of course, then apples would also be available for the later wagons. In other words, with enforceable property rights, people have the incentive to work hard and plan for the long-run future because they will profit from their efforts. But without those property rights, the incentives instead are for people to plunder the resources in the short run before someone else does. I like that example. So, in conclusion on this section, Thomas Jefferson famously said that we should have a bloody revolution every generation to keep, I thought I heard my husband, to keep the vested interests at bay. Well, our Constitution could keep it from being bloody, but how long has it been since we had a revolution? The late 1850s, when the Republicans took over from the Whigs. So maybe it's long since time for a revolution to take place. And the Libertarian Party is the only hope in sight. So that's it for Chapter 5.